This is a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station.
BFM 89.9, good afternoon. I'm Roshan Kannison and welcome to Enterprise Explores, the show where we help you navigate the ever-changing universe of business from the headlines to the bottom line. On the back of Malaysia formally ratifying the UK's ascension into the CPTPP, or the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, today we're going to be starting off Monday light and breezy and take a refresher on the CPTPP and exploring its potential impact on the Malaysian business landscape. These are terms we often hear about these large-scale programs, but what it means to us on the ground is sometimes obscured by all the big terms that we hear. Now, the CPTPP itself includes 12 member countries and was designed to reduce trade barriers and promote economic cooperation across a wide range of sectors. And if the term sounds kind of familiar but not too familiar, it was born out of the TPP, right, which was another agreement that went the way of dust some time back. Now, current members include Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, and Vietnam. And the UK's entry into the CPTPP will swell the combined GDP value of the bloc to an estimated $15.4 trillion US, or around 15% of global GDP. At the time of the announcement last week, MidTier said that the ratification allows for Malaysian exports to benefit from immediate duty-free treatment on 94% of tariff lines, particularly for palm oil, cocoa, rubber, electric and electronics, chemicals, as well as machinery and equipment. And the agreement is expected to enter into force by the end of 2024 for the UK and the countries that have ratified it. Now, then again, any participation into any kind of expanded market program will also bring with it competitive elements, because you've opened up your market to other people, but also you are now open to other people to come into your markets as well. So to talk about free trade agreements, the value, the consequences, and the concerns around them, and again, a primer into the CPTPP, I'm joined in the studio today by Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, CEO for the Center for Market Education. Carmelo, it's good to see you again. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm well, thank you. I am very glad to be here with you today.
It's good to have you in the studio. I know it's been a while since we've done that. I know you still do your commentaries with with Morning Run every once in a while as well.
Yeah, true.
Now, let's start with the basics here. Could you start by giving us a refresher, right, on the key provisions of the CPTPP and what it aims to achieve, right, by reducing these trade barriers and promoting economic cooperation, all that jazz?
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, we have to go back to the TPP. So
the good old days.
the good old days. Then a few years back, let's say 7-8 years ago, the US say, guys, bye-bye.
We're out.
We are out. And, there was some logic there. So I don't simply shoot at that decision. There was some ratio behind. Was a decision motivated by a different approach to international trade, including a different approach to free trade. But the remaining 11 countries decided, okay, let's go ahead without the big guy in the room. Let's try to develop something different. And it was around 7 years ago, so November 2017.
Wow.
Yeah, so already 7 years.
My God.
Which was more or less also the period of my first appearance on BFM. So 7 years ago, the 11 countries decided to sit down and they had a meeting in Vietnam, and they invented or created or rebranded the agreement as CPTPP, which I always struggle to pronounce.
Alphabet soup.
And, now with the UK ratifying, we have 12 countries. And I think if you have to identify the two main areas of intervention, they are rules and regulations on one side and market access on the other side. So with regarding to the rules, let's say the agreement try to develop some standards on in example how countries should make new food safety regulations, or whether they can ban the transfer of data to other country members of the agreement. From the market access, instead, is, let's say that the agreement will aim at cutting most of the tariffs that are now implemented between the different markets, open up the service markets, liberalize visa conditions for business travelers, and so on. Of course, each member has its own schedules, commitments, and in some cases the commitments are offered to all other members, while in others they are restricted to some specific negotiation. I would say that that's probably the weakest part of the agreement, that not all the tariffs are abandoned. Each country, by entering the negotiation, started to fight, to defend certain areas, and that's when things get complicated.
So it's like free trade with an asterisk, right?
Yes, absolutely. So
what was it? I think the document itself was like 100 pages or something.
Probably we are going close to the thousands. Even the Malaysian government document, the cost benefit analysis, I think is 352 pages.
Wow.
Only the cost benefit analysis from the Malaysian government. So can you imagine how complicated? So that's why at the beginning I was mentioning that the US had probably a different idea of free trade. Even in my perception, free trade agreement could be very simple. I can sell my products to you, you can sell your products to me. But obviously here we have governments negotiating with each other, with their own sets of interests, and although this agreement is not perfect, or how ideally a free trade advocate would see it, is probably a step in the right direction.
I guess policy isn't made overnight, right? And hopefully we can move towards, because I guess if I remember correctly, with the US being in the room, at least at that point, there was a big market access carrot that you could use to kind of like, hey everyone, we'll make it easier for you to enter our market, but you need to follow these these free trade rules, right? Which I think the attempt was to try to make it a little simpler at the time, but obviously it's now it's a thing of the past at this point. So we've touched a little bit on some of the differences between CPTPP and maybe what a full-on free trade agreement would look like. Could you also tell us, I guess, Carmelo, how does this CPTPP differ from other trade agreements that Malaysia already has or is part of, right? Because this isn't the first one. It's nor will it be the last one, I think. So tell us a little bit about the advantages that this brings.
Well, I think that one of the main positive aspects that I have seen beyond the tariff themselves is this idea to expand the concept of local content or local production from one country to the bloc. So the all 12 countries participating into the agreements can combine their separate production in order to get a product that contains elements from the different countries, and this product goes out not only within the countries of the agreement, but also outside as a country, as a product certified of origin from this block. So this obviously makes things easier for different countries that are part of the agreement, even for small players, because they could just add something that is a small part of a production process, of a value chain, and yet market that thing as something that is for the bloc and from the bloc. And this could eventually facilitate agreements, free trade agreements, of the bloc itself with other blocs, like in example the EU, and you know how things can get complicated there.
But I guess it's negotiation in numbers, right? So if you as a bloc can work together and be like, okay, one company in Malaysia wants to do something, is working with this other company as part of the bloc, let's say in Japan, right, who's also part there, or even Mexico. So you've got this streamlined approach to how they can work together, as opposed to if they didn't have the bloc as an umbrella there. And I guess that's the hope, right, that any kind of these agreements bring to the table. Carmelo, we've got to go into a few messages. When we come back, we'll move into some of the tangible changes that Malaysian businesses should expect in the short term and in the longer term as well from all the things that we've been discussing today. Folks, this is Enterprise Explores, the show where we help you navigate the ever-changing universe of business from the headlines to the bottom line. I've been speaking with Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, CEO of the Center for Market Education, and we've been breaking down the CPTPP, its implications for the Malaysian business landscape locally and abroad as well, the value it brings, the non-value it brings, and how it differs from other things that we have been doing. We'll be back after a few messages. I'm Roshan Kanasan for BFM 89.9, the business station.
Business-filled minds, BFM 89.9.
BFM 89.9, welcome back to Enterprise Explores. I'm Roshan Kanasan, and this is the show where we help you navigate the ever-changing universe of business from the headlines to the bottom line. On the back of Malaysia formally ratifying the UK's ascension into the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the CPTPP, we're doing a refresher on the agreement to explore its potential impact on the Malaysian business landscape. Today we're discussing what it means for Malaysia, particularly in terms of market access, rules and regulations, and much more. And to help me break this all down, I've got in the studio with me Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, CEO for the Center for Market Education. He's also faculty member at the School of Business and Economics with the Universitas Prasetiya, Mulya in Indonesia. Carmelo, earlier you gave us a little bit of a primer, right? A little bit of a reintroduction, given how heavy this topic is, something that can be very important to do. Also kind of comparing it to other agreements out there. And a key terminology that we were using earlier, or you were using earlier, was block, right? That this should be treated, or hopefully will be treated, like a block. Very much like the EU in that sense. Now, talk to us about what kind of tangible changes Malaysian businesses and even consumers should expect as a result of this agreement, and when might these changes start to become more evident? Because these things don't happen overnight.
Well, looking at the side of the consumer, I think that when these agreements come into place, the consumer is the one that often gets immediately the very high share of benefits,
because it's just a reduction of tariffs.
So more products can come in, and usually they come in at a cheaper price. So consumer benefit is absolutely there, even for products that now maybe don't arrive to Malaysia because there is nothing in place between countries far away, like Mexico, in example.
Yeah.
Is something, we tend to look at Mexico only from one side of the picture that is depicted by Netflix. There is much more beyond that in Mexico. And if we look instead of the perspective of businesses, I see it, as a medium and a long-term perspective. So I believe that immediately we will see a benefit for the traditionally strong industries of Malaysia, like E&E, which is very important in this specific historical moment, and palm oil also, which is looking for new markets around the world and a wider recognition as a dignified product. And this is immediately. But of course, I see there also the concern from smaller players. Yeah. They say, okay, the market is getting flooded with cheaper products. We can't control. We will be wiped out, and etc. I understand that point of view, but at a certain point we must grow. We can't, and the government can't think like a mommy that never won't allow the kids to grow and keep on holding them hand by hand and therefore protecting them. Overprotection means stopping the development. So Malaysia has a critical side in its production structure, which is extremely fragmented. 78% or so of Malaysian firms are micro businesses, and they produce something like 30% of the GDP. So my hope for the long run is that a bigger access to international markets, a wider access, will push these firms into consolidation. You know what I mean?
Bring them together so they can fight a little bit better, increase the productivity. I think this is something even the OECD mentioned in their recent survey, that the productivity level of the micro SMEs isn't really there or can be improved, right? And a big part of this can just be even digitalization to make them more competitive. And then eventually, I mean, if you can't do it by yourself, maybe the consolidation factor might make you stronger.
That is very important, and there's where really size matters, because we keep on talking also about wages and digitalization and mechanization, but in order for a business to adopt a higher degree of mechanization, automation, digitalization, you need for that investment to make sense.
You got to amortize it over a larger base.
If you have a family, coffee, a family cafe, you may even have the capital, let's say, to buy a roaster, a big roaster, and roasting your own coffee. But if you have, 20 customers a day, it simply doesn't make sense. It's not just a matter of capital. It's a matter of making the investment meaningful.
Actually, that's a great example, right? So if you had a roaster, you had a cafe, then you build a roaster. Now, you can't be only selling to your own cafe anymore, right? You got to go and start supplying your competitors as well. That no longer becomes to make sense of that kind of investment.
Exactly, and then becomes the chain, and then you optimize, and that's where productivity grows. But without that step, which is not just an economic step, we need the institutions to push for that, and I think free trade agreements are an institutional arrangement that push for that, but mainly the change is cultural, is a mindset for an entrepreneur, to let the baby grows.
Give up that control of their company to work with someone else. That's a big cultural shift, right? It's a very personal thing. But in order for your firm to really grow, sometimes you have to consolidate, grow, and to tap into the strengths of other people out there, other entrepreneurs that may be better at other things, so that you can build a little bit of a moat for yourself, right? So those are some of the longer term things. And from the immediate perspective, I think you already mentioned that exports coming in might be cheaper. Is there anything else to expect in the more immediate term?
But it could be even investments coming into the country. So the investment strategies of firms, in particular big firms of the different countries that sign the agreement, may change at the light of the agreement, and therefore try to make investments in those countries that sign the agreement. And more investments means more jobs. I'm talking about really entrepreneurial investments, not just financial investments. This is one thing. And on the same line, the concept of the block that I mentioned at the beginning may create international synergies for common productions, whereby you not simply have a production that is consolidated in certain countries, but is dispersed in different countries and then consolidated only at the final point for final export, let's say. And this could actually develop and trigger a domino effect, so that even for the last mile, to build a good port infrastructure, then you get the incentive because you have more products that potentially can flow into your port, into your free trade zone because of this agreement.
Now, we've mentioned some of the benefits, or at least some of the implications towards the micro SMEs here. But for the larger enterprises, let's say the SME, the mid-tier market, the mid-tier companies, what could we expect to see in terms of Malaysia's participation in the CPTPP and how it might impact them, both on the positive and the negative?
Well, on the negative, I think that immediately they can feel the shock of a stronger competition, and that's where there is this abuse war resilience, which became sort of a slogan. But that is where the real resilience is built in front of a stronger competition. You see if you can take the challenge and bring it forward. This is one thing. On the benefit side, instead, I think that the benefit is not just in having access to a bigger market, but also to a bigger value chain, supply chain. And with all the regulatory framework that is adopted, if adopted properly and not in a too rigid way, it could become also a way to push Malaysian businesses into best practices in terms of safety regulations, labor regulations, compliance with a higher degree of international standards.
Some professionalization, some internationalization as well. I know you mentioned earlier palm oil and E&E, electric and electronics could be areas that could see some positivity from this. Could you elaborate a little further in terms of the benefit that they could get from being part of the bloc, and also if there are any other industries that might benefit?
Well, for EAE and palm oil, obviously the immediate benefit is the wider market, the access to wider market. These industries are already competitive in themselves, so they just find here a trampoline for further expansion. Together, even with other micro products like I think optical and plastics, which is another industry where Malaysia is specialized. So these are the things, and probably, and this is really a hope that I have. The attraction for more investments and the option of a bigger market could strengthen the manufacturing basis of this country. I think, and this has been an object of debate, that indeed Malaysia went through a too fast and too soon process of deindustrialization, embracing this idea that a modern economy is fully made of service. I think that we went into that too fast and premature deindustrialization. We need to rebuild that. I think that a solid economy like Malaysia, where you have availability of land, you are not a country like Singapore, where you are forced into the corner of the service economy. So we have competitive advantages on labor, on regulation. This could be the time to rebuild an industrial backbone for the country in a scenario of regional competition.
And it's interesting, right? It's always you got the space plus location. These are things that have made this, particularly the peninsula, so valuable for centuries now, right? We've gone through the Straits of Malacca till today, still an incredible route for trade. But on top of that, we're also seeing it. Cables, undersea cables being laid, communication data, data centers in the region as well. So things are changing, and it's still, again, location, space, things that we can leverage.
Geography is there, and it didn't change.
Fascinating, Carmelo. A lot of the way the world is today comes down to geography.
We had toward the second part of the Middle Age and the early 16th centuries, we have basically the nutmeg collected in Indonesia, transit to the Strait of Malacca, where Indian merchants were buying it and bringing it to the Arabic Peninsula. The Arabs merchant were meeting the Venetians in the Middle East, and the Venetians were flooding spices all over Europe. This was already globalization almost 1,000 years ago. And everything was centered around the production and trade that was happening in the Malacca Strait.
Leverage what you have, and then add value where you can with other parts, right? And that's where, I guess, again, we could go into a history lesson and the implications of history. I wish I appreciated geography like how I appreciate it today when I was in school. I think I wouldn't have found it as boring, or at least understood why it was important. Coming on the flip side of this, and we've touched on this a little bit, of not on the Straits of Malacca, the flip side of the CPTPP. Some critics have argued, and this is always going to be the case, right, with any kind of agreement that opens up market access, is that it will expose local businesses to competition from larger, more developed economies. So I think like Japan, Singapore are part of the agreement as well. I know you've already touched on this a little bit, but could you elaborate a little further on how valid a concern this is, right? Because I know we talked about how micro SMEs may need to consolidate and might be pushed towards professionalization. But aside these two pillars here, is it a lot more? Are we hyping up the fear here more than the benefits out there?
Well, in the debate, there is always someone that tries to do that, I believe. And even in economic theory, we may have different perspectives on things. So people like me may tend to overemphasize the benefits of free trade. Others may tend to do the opposite. So that's perfectly fine. That's how knowledge progresses, through the confrontation between different ideas. So, but I think that in particular, for politicians to surf the wave of protectionism, the protectionist rhetorics, not protectionism themselves, could be more immediately rewarding, because they give. I mean, a politician advocating for protecting the nation. Obviously, protectionism actually doesn't protect anything, but is sold as the word says, as a way to protect the national economy. Is can be an easy gain, politically speaking, like the rhetoric on foreign workers, all these things that give the idea that we are Malaysia dulu, but then we need, with logic, with theory, with facts, with analysis, to dismantle these arguments and show that the best way indeed to have Malaysia dulu is to introduce Malaysia into the international scenario, not to keep her away.
Carmelo, we've got to go into a few messages. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the dispute resolution mechanisms, as well as the implications of the UK joining the CPTPP as well, right? And what this could bring, as well as some of your thoughts on the Malaysian budget that's coming up in about a month's time, actually, at this point. Folks, this is Enterprise Explores, the show where we help you navigate the ever-changing universe of business, from the headlines to the bottom line. I've been speaking with Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, CEO for the Center for Market Education and faculty member for the School of Business and Economics at Universitas Prasetiya, Mulya, Indonesia. And we've been breaking down the CPTPP and giving everyone a little bit of a refresher on what it entails and its potential implications. I'm Roshan Kanison. We'll be back in just a bit, so keep it here to BFM 89.9, the business station.
Business, finance, and more. BFM 89.9.
BFM 89.9, welcome back to Enterprise Explores. I'm Roshan Kanison, and this is the show where we help you navigate the ever-changing universe of business, from the headline to the bottom line. On the back of Malaysia formally ratifying the UK's accession into the CPTPP, we're doing a refresher on what this this comprehensive and progressive agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership has in store for Malaysia and its business landscape, and much more. And helping me break all this down has been Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, CEO for the Center for Market Education and faculty member at the School of Business and Economics with the Universitas Prasetiya, Mulya, Indonesia. Carmelo, so far you've helped us get through quite a bit, right, in this refresher, in terms of the introductions, what the agreement was, how it differs from other agreements we've had in the past. And I know earlier on we made a comment that this is a free trade agreement with an asterisk, right, because of just how many terms and conditions there are. But I think you said that you were positive on it, in the sense that it's a step forward in the right direction to create this kind of economic bloc, and hopefully that bloc becomes stronger over time. There are people that are going to benefit. There might be people that are not going to benefit from it. But E&E in palm oil, including plastics and opticals, these were things that you mentioned as industries that could do well, given the larger customer base here. Are there any sectors that might face more challenges due to the increased market access and therefore the increased competition, right? Because we could see cheaper products come in.
Well, probably food is something, particular processed food, where Malaysia is a net importer, That's where eventually Malaysia could even become more dependent from other countries. But this is not necessarily bad, because, one of the main tenets of free trades is that each country should specialize in doing something in which they actually have a competitive advantage. So as far as consumers benefit and there is access to the market from where that products come from, that's fine.
So I guess it's specialization, right? You do what you're best at, I do what we're best at, and then we try and find some negotiation for how to trade that value. very interesting thing, I think you brought this up earlier as well. So there are two key components of the agreement, right? So you've got rules and regulations on one side, and then you've got market access on the other. Part of this includes this dispute resolution mechanism, and which is a key part of trade agreements, but this could be quite interesting as a block, right? So how important is having this type of mechanism to encourage trade, better trade between nations?
This is quite an interesting thing, actually, because, one of the main factors actually weighing in for the success of an economic initiative is the institutional framework and how much it is framed around the rule of law. So having a common system of disputes rather than having two disputes where we are going to dispute. So the place of so the place where we are going to dispute is not disputable can create a higher degree of certainty for businesses and therefore making things faster. And so this is a step forward in terms of rule of law.
Now, there are 12 members currently in the CPTPP, if I have that number correct, and the UK finally officially joining with everyone ratifying their accession. How might being part of the CPTPP impact trade and investment relations with non-CPTPP countries, right? Because I think we talked a little bit earlier about the block concept.
This could be in two directions, even a radicalization, of blocks and the confrontation, or improving with a higher degree of cooperation. Obviously, for the countries, being part of this new bloc gives a sense of strength in going to negotiate with more consolidated blocs, like we mentioned, the European Union or the NAFTA. So I think that if reason prevails, that could be a season of new agreements and also a season for a higher degree of common understanding between different people talking, which is, I think, at the base of every kind of negotiation, trying to speak the same language and not to protect our own ideas.
And I guess the interesting thing about this agreement is that it's not based on geography. It's seemingly based on economic values, that these nations, these 12 nations at this point, agree that, okay, fine, this is a basis that we can work with and work on together, as opposed to being like nations of different values being put together just because, we're in the same location, so we should all have this block together. Because if you're in the same location and you don't necessarily have the same values, you don't really move anywhere. I'm not trying to imply any particular block in particular, but it is what it is, right? You need common values in order to negotiate as a block. So if you wanted CPTPP to negotiate with the EU, etc., or I think NAFTA, what's the new NAFTA called? United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement. Very straightforward.
Okay. Actually, there is a geographic element here because it is the Pacific. So
around the Pacific Rim.
If we look at the world map, the atlas, in a different way by moving from having the Atlantic at the center and moving the Pacific, there is also a geographic element that is also a sign that things are changing around the world, so that the Mediterranean and the Atlantic are not the only
I guess the body of water is no longer as big of a hurdle as it used to be, given the trade and shipping routes that we have established. But that's quite interesting, right? Just shifting the globe a little bit shows you that there is this ring here. And if anyone's wondering why Pacific Rim, the movie was called Pacific Rim, it's for this particular reason, right? Carmelo, we are now... is there anything else you want to add about the CPTPP?
No, it's okay.
All right, so now we're a couple of weeks ahead of the budget. I think the budget's for mid-October. We're now end of September. It's the 23rd of September. With the upcoming budget, just about a month away, is there anything in particular you're watching for this year?
Well, I have to say, probably I said the same last year. I'm not sure, but it may be the thing I'm looking at with the highest degree of interest is the fiscal side. So not related with what we have discussed this morning, but in general, in the past few years, I think that there is not been the attempt of really bringing forward a holistic and comprehensive fiscal reform. Rather, we had scatter measure here and there, the new digital tax, the new tax here and there.
All also very revenue focused.
Yeah,
right?
very revenue focused. So the fiscal consolidation, the fiscal responsibility also that the government has committed to, which is a good thing, has been tackled mostly from the revenue side. And I think nothing really, and also in a scatter way, not in a very organic way.
Yeah.
While on the expenditure side, I think I would like to see something more done there.
It's just quite funny, right? Because every year the first thing we look at is how much bigger is the budget, which we shouldn't be lauding that.
No, absolutely no.
Especially when it's like the OPEX, for example, that is going up, because that's how you got to break it down, right? You look at it
and every year is the biggest budget ever.
Yeah, and it's called inflation.
Yes, exactly.
So that'll be interesting to see, right? What kind of cost factors? I mean, we've heard little bits and pieces, right? Okay, obviously fuel subsidy is a big part of that, the rationalization of that. But also, I think was it last week or the week before, Anwar, the Prime Minister, has said now that all overseas travel, right, needs to get ministerial approval. You can't just willy-nilly take an entire troop and go overseas for a particular trip. These are, again, symbolic.
Yeah, exactly. Let's
see some really meaty.
What's the real impact of a higher degree of control on the traveling? I think the signal is good. I mean, if you look at the mentality that tries it, so is good, but it's not really going to change the budget or the deficit of the government.
This is like the garnish, right? It's like all the garnishing, but what the underlying cost implications, how do we address that? Is there a structured way of doing it?
And I think that in this regard, what has been advanced with the the public-private partnership could be something to look with interest, because it may be hopefully a new way to tackle altogether the way in which government develop infrastructures.
That is quite interesting. I think you spoke to Morning Run about this when the master plan came out, right?
Yeah, correct.
So if anyone wants to check that out, I guess if you go to the website and search for Carmelo Ferlito, you'll find the conversation he had with Morning Run, or otherwise I think it was under the Morning Brief or Top Story, if you want to go and listen to that. Carmelo, anything you want to add before we wrap up for today?
One thing, briefly about history.
Yes. Yeah. For those who weren't here earlier, we had a little bit of we jumped into history and geography for a little bit.
So, when we see at one of the countries that have been always represented as a symbol of free trade, the UK actually shifted radically to free trade with the abolition of the so-called Corn Laws in the 1840s. When they realized that that was convenient for them, financially speaking, because they needed European grains to flood into the UK so that European people could have money to buy the new manufactured products from the UK. So this is to say that free trade as a pure love exists probably only in the mind of a few economists, but then on the ground it is a matter of political convenience.
When it works for me, it's finally time to look into it, right?
Correct.
Carmelo, it's a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Folks, I've been speaking with Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, CEO for the Center for Market Education. He's also a faculty member with the School of Business and Economics at the Universitas Prasetiya, Mulya, Indonesia. And we've been breaking down the CPTPP today on the show. If you missed any part of the conversation, you can always find the podcast on the BFM website. That's bfm.my or the BFM app, which if you haven't downloaded it, you should probably do right now. Our shows are also available wherever you listen to podcasts. Just look for Enterprise Explores by BFM Media. I'm Roshan Kanasan. Keep it here to BFM 89.9, the business station.
You have been listening to a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station. For more stories of the same kind, download the BFM app.